So the title is Rowing with God's Tide. And it's based on my favorite lessons in A Course in Miracles, lessons 100 through 103, that say, God's will for me is perfect happiness. I agree with God's will for me. And God is love. Being love is happiness. So rowing with God's will is based on the idea that God's will for us is perfect happiness. There is an arc of the universe, and Martin Luther King says it bends towards justice. It also bends towards mercy, abundance, peace, harmony, grace, and of course, the greatest of these things, which is love. This current, this tide, this trajectory leads us to the awareness that we are now and we have always been at one with God. We've been locked in a savage fantasy where we've believed ourselves to be separate from God. We've been locked in a bad nightmare where we've believed that our separation from God caused us to be guilty prodigal children rejected and thus needing to be punished and needing to work our way back to God through an obstacle course of pain, suffering, struggle, and lack. However, someplace in our souls, we know that this is not how it was meant to be. Someplace in our souls, we know that our only purpose is that all of our consciousness remember who and whose we are, that we are beloved, holy children of God, and we are God's children, embraced by God. So the collective intention of the earth and the reason that we have been drawn to the earth is perhaps that we could see an outpicturing of all of our ideas that are inconsistent with God's love. So we could change those thoughts, so that we could change those ideas. And if we understand that the great flow, that the great tide is towards God's love, we can flow with this tide or we can get capsized by the waves of life. So let me ask you a question. Is there anybody here who would rather flow with the tide of God towards more peace, more justice, more joy and fulfillment? Yes. I hope there's no one here who would rather be capsized by the waves of life. There's nobody here that wants to be capsized by the waves of life. So, what brought me to this was when you see a group of rowers in a canoe, when you see these rowers, they are of one accord. They seem to be one body, not separate bodies. They're rowing in unison. They are rowing in a rhythm, and they all catch each other's rhythm. They all catch each other's energy, and their energy becomes one. They are not separate bodies working at odds with each other. No matter what differences they may have, no matter what differences they may have had, no matter who was fighting with whom over some girl in the locker room 10 minutes ago, when they get out in the canoe, they are rowing together. It doesn't look like eight bodies in a canoe. It looks like one unified body of energy. And that's how they meet their goal. That's how they get to their destination easily and effortlessly. Well, what if we were all rowing towards the destination of a remembrance of our oneness with God? And what if instead of us all being in a canoe, we all came to the earth as a theater in the round, where we come to see our deepest errors in thinking play out in order that we might become fully aware of them and thus how we might heal them? What if that is our purpose for coming to the earth? In order to heal our erroneous consciousness, we must see it clearly. So maybe we put on a role. Maybe we put on the role of the character as a victim, and we find an eternal soul who will be our victimizer, who says, I love you so much that I'm going to put on this costume as your victimizer. Because I love you so much, I want you to heal, and I want you to see the error of your thinking so that you could change it, so that you could remember that you are one with God. I love you so much that I am going to play your victimizer in this little drama on the earth, in the theater of the round. And they do that so that we can realize this can't be, this cannot be, this should not be, so that we can evolve a part of our consciousness to vibrate with the pure love that we are, that we have always been, and that we will always be. Because when we get locked into the struggle of a victim and a victimizer, we realize there is a consciousness here that is in error. We call God in. God, I let you in to heal this part of me that obviously is in error because I am not enjoying this. And the light of God then heals a layer or a level of our consciousness. And another layer and another level of our consciousness vibrates with the unconditional love that we are. We then rediscover an aspect of our divinity. We rediscover an aspect of our holiness. We rediscover an aspect of our oneness with God and our wholeness. Where we thought we were less than whole, where we thought we were less than loved, where we thought we were less than seen, heard, respected, or embraced, we realize that as we let God in, we are loved. We are embraced. And the part of us that didn't believe it starts to believe it and starts to vibrate with love. So we're just characters in a drama. But this is not who we really are. What if our souls were neither white nor black, neither straight nor gay, neither rich nor poor, neither suburban, urban, or rural, neither American nor formal? What if our souls were just energy? And despite the seeming separation of our bodies, what if our souls were all one with each other because our energies were all one with each other? And what if our souls and our energies were not only one with each other, but what if we were all one with the unified field of God's love as well? Well, quantum scientists are finding this out. They are beginning to quantify that there is a level of vibration that we all emit, that is a vibratory rate and a vibratory energy that binds us all together and binds us with the one. So we put on a costume, but that costume covers who we really are. And God doesn't see our costume or the ways we've limited ourselves or judged ourselves or the situations we've found ourselves in because of our costumes. God doesn't see any of that. God only sees what God created. Let's do an example. Anybody remember the movie Yentl with Barbara Streisand from 1983? Anybody remember Yentl? Well, the story was that Yentl was a young boy who wanted to study the Torah. Well, Barbara Streisand was Yentl, and Barbara Streisand wanted to study the Torah. But only boys could study the Torah. So Barbara Streisand disguised herself as a boy so she could study the Torah. Now, if you watch that movie as I watched that movie, there is not a person in the world who did not believe that that was Barbara Streisand, despite the costume, right? She's got one of the most recognizable faces in the world. And you couldn't tell me for 10 seconds I couldn't suspend my disbelief to think that Barbara Streisand was Yentl, a 14-year-old boy. Well, guess what? You can't convince God that you are less than. You can't convince God that you are unworthy. You can't convince God that you are the limits of your costume because God only sees who God created you to be in the same way that we saw Barbara Streisand and we only saw Barbara Streisand. We didn't see Yentl. So, the point of this is that no matter what costume you have, no matter what you've been through, no matter what you're going through, you are still as God created you. Barbara Streisand was still Barbara Streisand, and you are still the holy, beloved child of God. So even though you are in this drama that has the purpose of causing you to remember your holiness, your wholeness, your goodness, your lovability, and your loving essence. Even though you're wearing this costume in this costume drama, just like Barbara Streisand wore her Yentl garb, you are on the tide of God's love. You can ride the tide of God's love to your good. You can ride the tide of God's love to grace. You can ride the tide of God's love to peace. And this is inevitable. A Course in Miracles lesson 292 says, a happy outcome to all things is sure. This is God's promise, and God's promises make no exception. So, in summary, God has a will for our happiness, and that outcome is inevitable. There is a tide towards our happiness, and our task is to row towards that tide instead of rowing against it. I want to repeat this because this is the premise of this whole lesson. God has a will for our happiness and has created a tide, an arc, a trajectory that would lead us to our happiness. Our task is to, and that outcome is inevitable. Our task is to roll with God's tide instead of rowing against God's tide. You know, the character that we play at times may have rowed against the tide of God. You know, God may be singing, always and forever, I'll always love you forever. But our character is singing Rose Royce, you abandoned me, love don't live here anymore. And if we're singing a different tune than God, then we are rowing against God's tide, and we might have a capsizing event, right? So God is saying, I love you, I love you, I love you, I am love, you are love, we are love, love is all there is. And we're saying, but no, God, what about this thing I did? But no, God, what about how so and so treated me? But no, God, what about this thing I learned about myself that somebody taught me when they told me I wasn't good enough? We are rowing against God's tide. And our task is to realize anytime we're rowing against God's tide, we can change. We can change correction. We can change directions. We can correct our course. So, how do we do that? How do we do that? Well, there are three things that we can do. Number one, we can stop. We can stop. Anytime you are not enjoying something, you can stop. I mean, this may be simple and obvious, but quite often we are so in our groove that we think that our groove is inevitable. But our groove is not inevitable. You can stop, even for a moment, just to take a breath. You can stop. And when you stop, you breathe. You reorient yourself. It's like a restart on a computer. For in that moment, you forgot that God was with you. So you stop and call God in. In that moment, you forgot God was for you and you believed God was against you, and it shows up in the situation. So you stop and call God in. In that moment, you believed that there was a force outside of you causing you pain, and you were not ready to look within to say, what is the error in my thinking that contributes to this thing I do not like? So you can stop and let God in. God, I let you in. Anytime you are experiencing anything other than love, first stop, breathe, call God in. Second, look. I call this the stylistics method of salvation, because there was a song by the stylistics, stop, look, and listen to your heart and what it's saying. So you stop, you look within. What is the consciousness I have held that believes in what is created outside of me? Obviously, this is a belief that is an error. So I will change. What is the new truth, God? I choose to see this from your perspective instead of my own. And let me tell you a story about this. A woman, I know, a friend of mine, she was having a conflict with a coworker in the office. And they were together, and the conflict started escalating and escalating and escalating. And it started turning into a screaming match that could have ended both of their careers. But she realized she wasn't rowing with the tide of love. She realized in that moment she was rowing against the tide of love. And so, in that moment, she stopped. She breathed, even for a second. And she said, God, let me see this differently. God, come into this meeting before somebody gets hurt or fired. God, be here now, is what she said. And in that moment, when she stopped, she no longer saw an angry coworker. She saw an angry little boy. She saw a hurt little boy. And if you see a hurt child, the impulse for your compassion comes up. So all of a sudden, she wasn't in attack and defend mode. And all of a sudden, she was in the mode of compassion. Something shifted. The grace of God came in. The tide of God came in and shifted the situation. So she saw this person with compassion. Her energy started to embrace this person. The noise level started ratcheting down. Solutions started happening. And she listened to what she was to say next. God told her everything to say next. She de escalated the situation, and the situation healed in an instant. And to this day, these two coworkers are the best of friends. He stopped, she looked, and she listened to God. And she listened to God, and God got her out of that situation. Anytime we are rowing against the tide of God's will for our perfect happiness, we can do the same thing. And this is not just in terms of our individual journey. This is also in terms of our collective journey. This is important. Right now, we seem to be a nation and a world divided, rowing in different directions that are not God's will for our unity, for our collective happiness, and for our collective well being. We seem to be pulling as a country, and as a world in different directions in ways that are clearly very destructive. We're playing characters, conservatives versus liberals, Democrats versus Republicans, Americans versus foreigners, Ukrainians versus Russians, Palestinians versus Israelis. And we see an arc of destruction because we are rowing against each other, seemingly, instead of rowing towards the same goal. Is anybody with me in seeing this? We can stop, we can look, we can listen. Because even though it seems as if we are in warring tribes, we drink the same air. We breathe the same air, we drink the same water, and we live under the same sky and above the same earth that must support us all. And the air and the sky and the water has been poisoned by the hate born of the false idea that we are separate instead of one. And so it seems at times that we are rowing towards destruction instead of rowing towards God's will for everyone's perfect happiness until it dawns on us that we are all one. Matthew 25th chapter 40th verse says, and the king says, I tell you the truth, when you did it to the least of me, of my brothers and sisters, you are doing it to me, which is an indication that anything and everything we do for ourselves in love and for humanity in love touches all of humanity, and we all have a part to play in this. We need not put on the costume of victim and victimizer, Democrat versus Republican. We can put on the costume of God's holy, beloved child. You came here to heal the earth. You came here to be at one with God. You came here to remember your oneness with God, enabling others to remember the same. You came here not to see your brother as enemy, but you came here to see your brother as hurting, and you are the mechanism through which you and your brother heal. This is not just for you and a coworker, because you are the masters of God's light, placed here for this purpose. This is for you and your world as well. We no longer need to learn the lessons that we've already seen. As Mitch McConnell said, no new information is gained by the second kick of a mule. So, what we're seeing right now is we are seeing people who may have voted for a certain candidate because that candidate shared the same dislike for other people that they did. And we are seeing how they, if this is the case, and an example of the case might be farmers who may have voted for a certain candidate and now they have nowhere to sell their soybeans and they're going bankrupt. They used to sell their soybeans with China, but they can't anymore because China's buying their soybeans from Brazil. They used to sell their soybeans to USAID, but since USAID has been abolished, they can't sell their soybeans to countries that are starving. So the soybeans are rotting in the fields and the farmers are going bankrupt. How is this rowing with God's will for our collective good? Until we all realize what we do to ourselves, to the other, we do to ourselves. There is no other, there is only our brother. There is no other. There is only our brother. And beneath the costume our brother is wearing, there is the light of God in our brother as well as ourselves. And as we experience ourselves as the light of God, we are more and more able to see our brother as the same. So, the point of all of this is God has a will for all of us. We must row together. We must stop. We must open to God and bring God into any micro situation and every macro situation. God caused us to see our oneness. God caused us to see our common destiny. God caused us to see the love in each and every one of us. And God caused us to see the love in me. For as I see the love in me, I am more able to see the love in my brother, and I am more able to see that I and my brother are one. We must choose God's will for perfect happiness for us. And when we do it for ourselves, we do it for our brothers. So I'm going to end by just reading you this lesson in A Course in Miracles, lesson 239. Father, I have wandered from your will. I have defied it, broke its laws, and interposed my own will, believing that my own will is more powerful than yours. Yet, what I am in truth is I am the expression of your will for perfect happiness. Get that? You are the expression of God's will for perfect happiness. You are the extension of God's will for perfect happiness. And this will never change. As you are one with me, God, I am one with you. And this I chose when I was created. You chose to be at one with God. Even though you put on a costume of separation, you are still one with God. You will never be anything but one with God. And that choice was made for all eternity. It cannot change. So our task is to accept our union with each other and with our source, and that we have no will apart from God's will, which is the will for our perfect happiness. We no longer have an alien will. God, I will to will your will. I will to will your will, oh God. So if you can't do anything else, and if you don't think anything else about this sermon, just think about the idea. God, I will to will your will. The part of me that is hurting right now, I will to will your will. The part of me that is confused right now, I will to will your will. The part of me that is angry right now, I will to will your will. The part of me that feels threatened by another party or confused by all the things going on in the world, I will to will your will. Our task is to move our stuff out of the way and move the light of God in, the will of God in, the love of God in, the light of God in, the vision of God in. For we are the channels for God's light and love. We are the vectors for healing on the earth, and we are who God sent to be here, planted on the earth to support God's will. God's will for you is perfect happiness, and God's will for everyone is perfect happiness. Let us row together to ride the tide of God's will for love. Thank you.